Okay, any other? Chief, you regulated.
Audit, go ahead.
So I have a question regarding Lailatul Qadr when you mentioned about that God writes the fate of a person for the next year. I think, and then I'm kind of like confused with Lailatul Barak, where it's supposed to like it's written for that purpose in Min Shaban.
Yeah, you know, that's very interesting because there's a transmission, there's hadith, precise. One of the companions asked the Prophet precisely that question. Just to make sure, I'm not one of those people who follows that school of thought that your fate for the year is written on Lailatul Qadr. And I don't follow it, partly because there's so many different reasons, but to me, it's not convincing. But those who have accepted these reports and do believe that Allah, that Lailatul Qadr is one of the biggest questions is, well, we have so many ahadith about fate. Some of these ahadith even go as far as saying that everything that is going to happen in your life, including whether you're going to go to heaven or hell, is known and written from the time of birth. Again, something I don't accept. So one of the things that the people who accept this tradition is, how do they reconcile between fate being written on Laylatul Qadr annually and all the other hadiths that identify different points of your life in which your fate is written. If you're asking me my own view, I'd say don't rely on that school of thought. I don't think Lailatul Qadr has anything to do with your fate for the next year. I think it is a night where you can experience Ruh al-Muqaddasa, the Holy Spirit, literal translation. Why angels? I mean, we have so many, by the way, we have traditions, for instance, that say that every time people get together like this Halaqa to study Islam, to study Sharia, to study Aqidah, that angels rush to the place and hover around the place. So we have a lot of traditions that tell us that angels interact with and respond to what human beings are doing. In some of the most negative versions of these ahadith is that, angels will not enter a home that has a dog, or will not enter a home that has a picture, or whatever. But so we have a lot of these reports about an interactive world between angels and human beings, and the other side, of course, the jinn, which. But Laylatul Qadr is supposed to be different. I mean, it's supposed to be an intense experience because it's not the normal interaction. But why and how? I don't think anyone that claims that they know the answer to that, I think, is lying. And that's why I think it can be experienced. It can be reasoned through. And there was what was the name? It was in Muslim Spain, Murcia. There was a famous teacher. She was actually one of Ibn Arabi's teachers. Her name was Fatima. Ibn Arabi, in his Futuhat, writes about Fatima at length, but she's also written about another. She has always fascinated me because her power of prayer was in fact. She is reported to have achieved amazing things simply by reciting the Fatiha. And she used to say that Allah has given me the greatest gift, the light of my life, which is the Fatiha. Ibn Arabi says that he spent years and years studying the Fatiha with her, and that he could have, and she much was much older than he was, that he could have spent an equal number of years still studying the Fatiha. The reason I mention this is that she was reported to do dhikr solely by reciting the Fatiha over and over and over again. Because she didn't write herself, but her students wrote about her, what power this woman achieved and experienced through simply the Fatiha is something that can be attested to by people who experience what she experienced, but you can't reason through it. And so here is an example of someone that, if you would have asked her any of these questions about what to do Lailatul Qadr, she would have told you just read the Fatiha. She thought that if you truly want spiritual enlightenment, that's all you need. It's fascinating. And when you read, for instance, the way Ibn Arabi describes what she taught him about the Fatiha and Al-Makkiyah, it blows your mind. I mean, it's... so...
Yeah.
No, he.
Oh,
yeah,
no,
I just
you're-
you alluded to it earlier, and I'm sure you could expound on it much more, but it's probably going to be too big. What you were saying about Laylatul Qadr, the speech of God versus the word, the creation of the words of
Oh,
God.
the
There's some.
the created and uncreated. No, that's there was an old debate, and it was even, I mean, people died for that debate. People actually were willing to die, whether the Quran is created or uncreated, makhluq or ghayr makhluq. To simplify things greatly, Mu'tazila argued that it is not possible for the Quran to be uncreated, because that's a form of shirk. Only Allah is uncreated, and how can it be that the Quran would be co-eternal with God?
Yeah.
The opponents of the Mu'tazila would argue that the Quran is uncreated without us knowing how. And I think the reasoning was that if Allah created the Quran, that somehow that compromises the sanctity of the Quran itself and the eternality of the divine word. This, of course, goes to an older debate about the kalima, whether the word is something that God created from Adam, or whether it is co-eternal with God. Happily, that debate has died in the modern age. But the point that I was making about Surah Al-Qadr, that the Ahl-Hadith, the Ash'aris, who had a stake in the argument that the Quran is uncreated, had a stake in arguing that Laylatul Qadr means that the Quran was revealed in whole from al-Lawh al-Mahfuz li Sama' al-Ard. So in other words, it came complete from the divine tablet, the realm of God, to the realm of angels and human beings. I don't think that that's necessary for us to go that far. I mean, the view that when it says Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr, it means that we started the Quranic revelation in Laylatul Qadr, and I think that's good enough. We don't need to argue about what we don't know, and we have no way of knowing.
So this is versus like the whole Quran coming in Laylatul Qadr versus the initiation of it in Laylatul Qadr, and then Angel Gabriel over 23 years.
I mean, it's the uncreated thesis. I mean, is that the Quran, there is no moment in time when you can say that the Quran didn't exist. The Quran was always there. Of course, the Mu'tazila saw that was shirk, because the only thing that's eternal is Allah. And if the Quran was always there, then they feared that that's sort of like the Christians arguing the old Christian debate about whether the Son of God was created by God or was co-eternal as the divine. That same debate existed in Christianity, but about the Son of God. And part of the reason that the Mu'tazila wanted to say that the Quran was makhluk, created, is that they, or at least the opponents said that they were influenced by Aristotelian arguments about divinity and the nature of divinity. I mean, these are, at this point, I hope that they're academic debates. I mean, I found, when I was looking at some of the khutbahs giving about, in which Lailatul Qadr was mentioned, or the last Ashr of Ramadan, I found a weird khutbah from a mosque in New Jersey where the khutbah is given in Arabic, who went on and on about how accursed the Mu'tazila are, and how those who say that the Quran is created are the dogs of hellfire, and so. And I thought, you know, something that died in Islamic history. Why you, as if we Muslims need more issues to fight about? I mean, why are you going off about created and uncreated? Just let it die, let it be. Yeah, but that's what I was referring to.
Yeah, Dr. you talked about the the connection between Lailatul Qadr and Rasul Qadr and Kitab Qadr, and then I guess Ummatul Qadr, I guess, like, and how all of them I guess are related in some way. And to be a bit vulnerable, I guess I have an issue with the last one, the Ummatul Qadr, I guess because of my experiences as a convert.
Yeah.
And what I've been through these past like 14 years, and so it's hard for me to give credence to that, because it seems like the Qadr is supposed to be a function of the community's ability to fulfill its moral and ethical obligations, and if it's not doing that, then I don't know if the Qadr is actually there. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the idea, and it is not, it's the ought rather than the is, that, and it comes, just let's backtrack for a second. It comes from a number of theologians who argued Lailatul Qadr means, Qadr means the Qadr of shay, Qadr al-shay, the worthiness of something, and that the most unworthy person, or the person that feels most unworthy on earth, has the opportunity in that night to realize their own worthiness. Many said that ideally a Muslim ought to know that the gift of Laylatul Qadr correlates with not just the honoring of a particular night, but that there are things that should be honorable. The Book of God, the Prophet of God, and the Ummah of God.
So like the appraisal, like it should be worth.
It should.
Okay.
I mean, if it is. I mean, it is. It's. It is. The Ummah right now fails miserably at the scale of Ummatul Dhi Qadr. Because it doesn't act like one. I mean, even more disastrously, is that we don't even have an ummah. I mean, the hearts of Muslims are so divided But I believe that's precisely why we can't perform that function of shahada, shuhada lillah. وَلَوْ عَلَى أَنفُسِكُمْ. I mean, when Allah says that Allah should be more beloved to you than your father, your mother, your tribe, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge to Muslims, and very much like the beginning of the Islamic revelation, to get rid of the fascist tribal allegiances, to get rid of racism, to get rid of classism, to adopt this ethical message that Allah charged them with. Of course, I think we all understand that there are various degrees of failure and degrees of fulfillment. And in this day and age, I mean, the confusion is that even when I was growing up, it was sort of accepted as as theological dogma that the abolishing of racial differences and tribal differences was just a presumption that that's what Islam was about. It amazes me that even that little bit we've lost. So you get people now that try to deconstruct the idea that even what the Prophet ﷺ said in his final sermon on the Mount in Hajjat al-Wala, and try to justify racial differences, national differences in ways that are, I mean, it's in principle that's what we should strive for. We should be the best nation as an ummah. Our obligation is واجب الاستخلاف في الأرض وتعمير الأرض. We've been created as viceroys with a task of civilizing the earth. So which means that the covenant part is that we fully acknowledge our relationship to the divine. And the ta'mir part is the material part, that we should excel in the laws of causation, in using and employing and advancing humanity within the material world. Muslims right now are any civilizing, any ta'mir they do, they don't do because of a Muslim created social order. They do because they import everything from non-Muslims. I mean that's basic, and that's a fundamental failure for the ummah. I don't know if you were here in that part where I was saying that for particularly Middle Eastern Muslims, I have lost faith in Middle Eastern Muslims to the point that I think that Muslims cannot look to that part of the world for guidance anymore. Colonialism and despotism have just wreaked havoc and for the foreseeable future. It's not that I think it is forever, because I actually believe that the evolution of history will change things. But as long as Muslims are not even clear-headed in that part of the world about someone like Hafiz al-Assad in Syria, or someone about Sisi in Egypt, or someone like MBS in Saudi, or someone like that idiot Zayed in the Emirates. Then, if there are people who actually think that these people are okay and consistent with Islam, then I despair in these group of people. I mean, it's if right and wrong, what is evil and good is not so clear to you, You have someone that executes 37 people on the flimsiest, and people just continue on living life as if nothing happened. It blows my mind. Maybe we can be an ummah qayyimah. Maybe if Muslims in the West achieve a level of enlightenment and a level of confidence in embracing their tradition and becoming the pioneers of that tradition, maybe they can shine a light that would help Muslims elsewhere. We can't, the secret of life is hope. Because once you give up on hope, then it's just a process of disintegration. Even if you think that you remain constant, in fact you're disintegrating. The minute you say there is no hope, then every passing day takes you lower and lower until you wake up someday and realize that you've hit the bottom. So even if you have to lie to yourself to have some hope, because hope is the energy that keeps things moving forward. And my nature is not an optimistic person, and so I fight with myself a lot. And I simply say I believe in hope because I believe in Allah. That if Allah wanted to change things, Allah could change it overnight. I just want to meet Allah, having said, I understood the message and I worked for the message. I understood that in principle, your ummah should be the ummah qayyimah, and should be shuhada ala nas, and I worked towards that. And regardless of whether I succeeded or not, judge me on the work I've done.
Yeah, Sheikh Khalid, you touched a little bit upon one school of thought, or maybe several traditions that made a connection between the Israelites and their actions in the past. Yeah, and then one of the things that I've come across quite a bit is the interpretation of the verse Lailatul Qadr, that it's greater than that the night is greater than 1,000 months of worship. That's the interpretation that I've come across a lot. And so I wanted to ask you what your interpretations are and what you've come across.
I'm happy you asked that question because because I forgot to talk about that part, or rather skip that part. خير من ألف شهر. The issue is it identifying an empirical number, so it literally means 1,000 months of prayer, or is it a figure of speech to say that this night is very important, more important than many months? And both schools, they're basically a debate as to whether when it says خير من ألف شهر it actually means the number 1,000. In fact, one of the interesting things about this tradition, not just the Israelites, there is a tradition that says that the Banu Umayyah, the Umayyads, that the Prophet ﷺ said that the Umayyads will rule for 1,000 months. And this is what it's talking about when it says خير من ألف شهر. It's a very odd tradition that ties, instead of the Israelites, it ties it to the Umayyad versus non-Umayyad. But what I think is that, as in the case in Quranic usage generally, when it says 1,000 months, it's not actually, doesn't mean an empirical number. It is, that's the way that in so many Arabic poems, it signifies, basically, it's as if saying it's worth a lot. It's worth that a lot of other times. Now, there's a tendency among modern Muslims particularly to think that, it's a matter of a hasanat counter, that if you pray on Lailatul Qadr, then your you get like brownie points, your hasanat meter, is more than the prayers that other people do in 1,000 months. And I think that type of literalism kills the spirit of the Quran, because that's not what is intended. And I don't think anyone read even Arabic poetry, in other words, literature, that way at the time when the Quran is revealed. What it means is that it is a blessed night, a night that is worthy than a whole bunch of time elsewhere. And I don't, and reading it as a matter of a hasanat counter is not the issue. The issue is that your dua in this night is closer to Allah's ears than any other night. And so, I mean, there's some people that, I know a guy a long time ago who, wanted to be smart about, so last 10 days of Ramadan, every hour, he had a dua, he wanted to pass Sanawiyya al-Amma,
High school.
yeah, I wanted to go get accepted. I don't remember, in computer science or engineering or something. So he would come live and he would do a dua for about 30 seconds every hour. So it's okay, so now
Titrating the dua.
yeah, so I hit the right, and then I get accepted and so on. And I never forgot that, because it watching this, I thought of myself, it's cheapening the whole relationship with Allah. That type of mechanical dealing, which is very common among modern Muslims, unfortunately. I think that that type of reductionism bankrupts the spiritual message of a very powerful surah like Surah Al-Qadr, which tells you your nexus with the divine continues on special places and special times. And of course it's always available, but there is a special connection that is available to you, and work towards it. And I also believe that Allah knows your intentions. So if you intended, you intended to do iqama, and then, may God forbid, you had an accident and ended up in the hospital the last 10 days of Ramadan. Of course, and use an analogy to anything like it. So it prevented you from, if your intention is pure, and I think Allah responds. I don't think, it's a regimented, Allah is too generous. And they said, think well of Allah, kun hasan al-dhanni billah. Because if you give Allah the benefit of the doubt as far more merciful, far more compassionate, far more kind, far more receptive than any thing you can imagine on behalf of a human being, I think that Allah reciprocates that intentionality. If you think negatively of Allah, my belief is that you open up the doors to the demonic. If you deal with Allah as petty, all types of very nasty things come through that.
I have two questions. The first one is Lailatul Qadr limited to only Muslims? Like, what if there's a Christian that's praying authentically on that night? And then the second question is, can that night be different for every person? So, like, let's say I pray on, like, the 9th night of Lailatul Qadr and I just get that intensity, but somebody else prayed on the 3rd night of Lailatul Qadr and they felt that.
That's a really good question. Well, the second one, I'll take the second one first. This is those who said that Lailatul Qadr, it's really interesting because Ibn Arabi says exactly what you just said, that Lailatul Qadr is different for every human being within the last 10 days of Ramadan. And he gives examples of different mystics who achieved visions on different days on the same Ramadan within the last 10 days of Ramadan. And I don't remember the names of the people he discussed, but he tells you a lot of stories about, which is really interesting. I mean, I have to, honestly, I have not made up my mind about that because it's something that I would need to think about and research much more. The first question about Christmas, I don't know. I actually have not read, in my own reading, I've not encountered anyone talking about the possibility of Lailatul Qadr being something experienced by non-Muslims. So I don't know. I just don't know. But what I'm thinking about, I'm just remembering the whole Ibn Arabi discussion, and which Jilani agrees with him that in fact they go as far as saying that Allah, the reason that Lailatul Qadr is so crowded with angels is because there are different angels that respond to different human beings on different nights. And they say that it's the reason that it becomes a blessed night is because of the volume of angels that traverse. I don't know. You know, it's my gut reaction is to say that makes sense, but I don't know. Just a tough question. So.
Same question as the second.
I would be very curious if a non-Muslim said they experienced something. Yeah, I mean, that would be interesting. I mean, I'm sure that if I researched long enough and hard enough, I'll find something, because in this tradition, the research literally is always endless. And I've learned the hard way that you just have to stop yourself from, and move on, because otherwise you can end up, unless you become like Fatima, who said, okay, the Fatiha is enough for me, and she achieved all her insights through the Fatiha. Yeah, so I'm trying to resist the temptation to go back home and then spend hours researching that question, because I have so many other things that I'm supposed to do.
Professor, it's a very interesting question. Recently I'm doing research for this regarding the evolutions of the meaning from the mu'min to Muslim, like donor things, friend donors doing research, writing on how the conception of a Muslim as an identity actually is only recently, let's say during in late Umayyah period, when a Muslim become crystallized and as an identity as a Muslim, where before that period it's more ecumenical society where it's called more as a believer, a community of believer, which is more open than as a Muslim. So in the first period of Muslim, they will call themselves as a mu'min instead of a Muslim, because Muslim is mostly not referring to an identity, but it's referring to the way, of life, the essence of the teaching that Muhammad sends to us. In that sense, probably, if we bring it back, the Quran to its period when the community of believer is more open to anyone who believe in one God, who believe in in the good deeds, and believe in hereafters. I don't know. It's probably.
We know that. I mean, it's just from what you and Amanda said. I mean, Ibn Arabi says in his Futuhat very explicitly that because Ibn Arabi had read the Torah and read the Injil,
Yeah.
and he talks, he says my religion is the religion of love, and I forgot exactly the literal translation, but whether that love comes from the Torah or the Quran or the Injil, and that theological message of that Islam builds upon the earlier revelations. It was a consistent theme. I mean, in the poetry of Rabban Adawiyya, again, you find that even the challenging of the idea of nationalisms, and exactly but the question is, the possibility of journeying to the divine from believers who are not necessarily Muslim. It is well supported within the tradition, and especially in the Sufi literature, which is a consistent theme, and the idea that there are spiritual travelers on the path that are not. But the issue is whether Lailatul Qadr is explicitly for those who follow Muhammad, or more
open.
more open. And I have not thought of this question, to be quite honest. I just always assumed that it's something that only involves Muslims. I had not, but as you guys are talking, I'm just thinking about various things I've read, and I'm sure if I revisit these things, paying attention to that point, because a lot of times you read things, and if you're not paying attention to a particular point, you gloss over it. You don't pause at it. But that's a very, because there's a lot of evidence to support this, from even the Constitution of Medina itself, which and the way that the Prophet ﷺ conducted his affairs in Medina, it was always politics that crystallized the difference between a Muslim and non-Muslim, and Dar al-Islam versus non-Dar al-Islam. But the power of the Islamic messages was always in its inclusiveness. Yeah, that's a very interesting point.
I have another question about the Ruh and then the angels and then the Qudus. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I understand there's like a loving spirit, that's where creation is also made of that. So I'm just wondering if the angel is just like living beings, and then the Ruh or the spirit is just like another attributes or properties that created, then God absorbed himself, that basically creates everything else. So it's just like two different entities.
Ruh, because Allah says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ الرُّوحِ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. They ask you about the ruh and that spirit, and because Allah says وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي, that Allah, after creating Adam, that Allah blew into Adam min ruhillah, from the spirit of God. And the Quran refers to the ruh in several occasions as something, so we know that Allah lent, or Allah empowered Jesus, was Ruh al-Quds, which translates to Holy Ghost. But the Quran, but Allah makes it clear that we will never understand what this Ruh is. That Allah, Ar-Rahman Amr Rabbi, that it is something unknown to you and something you don't know about. This is not the case about recognizing angels as in theological terms we call Ashab al-Dhatiyya, that we exist as is that we exist as a separate, particularized entity. Each human being does. So do the angels, and so does the jinn. So the jinn break down into individual identities, and the angels break down, except that angels don't have free will. But they have different functions. That's all we can say about angels. I mean, there are a lot of traditions that, even about Surah Al-Qadr, that says, and I've skipped over all of them, the angels descend with X number of wings, and their wings are so large that it encompasses the whole earth, and there's even a report that says the Ruh is a particular, especially honored, especially powerful angel that comes down, and that angel, if he opened his mouth, he would swallow the entire earth. All of these traditions are suspect, to say the least. I mean, and there's a lot of them. What I distill from them is that the world of angels exists, and we'll never know. We until you die and actually experience angels firsthand, if you're lucky, rather than demons. But once you're on the other side, Allah has created no one comes to tell us, and even people who've got involved in spiritualism and so on, and claim to experience the spirit of a deceased one. No testimonial has come uninfluenced by culture and social, so that makes these testimonials quite suspect, or it might be jinn just pretending to be a human being. But we just don't know what the other side until you experience it. But as a Muslim, you do believe in angels as actual entities. Now, what is the spirit that comes on Lailatul Qadr? We don't know, and there's no means of knowing. But as a Muslim, you have to believe in ghaib. That's part of the challenge of humility as a human being. Because a human being, when full of hubris and arrogance, they only believe in what they can touch and what they can see. Philosophical hubris have gone as far as saying that others don't exist unless they only exist to the extent that they exist in your mind. So that reality, if there is no reality, there are only perceptions of reality. And that type of narcissism is precisely what faith, religious faith, comes to address. That says you are important as a human being, but you are not the end all of everything. That there is God as that. Of course, that was sifat, an essence and attributes. And there are angels, and there are jinn, and you and the human being exist, but other human beings exist with full integrity, and it is not the case that things only exist to the extent that you perceive them to be. That's part of the challenge of belief and the necessity of Iman. They're very interesting. I just said you have a lot of these narratives that I was spending a lot of time rereading about people testifying that on Lailatul Qadr. It's usually mystics, usually Sufis, that say, I saw angels, and they described, and I would love that experience. Hasn't happened. they say that when you see an angel, you know it, and people who have had the experience, basically just say, we don't care if you believe us or not, we know what we saw. I haven't had that experience.
If you don't have any other questions, there's a couple from online.
Oh, really?
Do you want
I forgot about those.
Okay, so can you comment on the concept of Khums in the Sunni school in comparison to the Shi'i? In the beginning of the Halaqa and many times before, you've mentioned the importance of learned shuyukh rather than preaching from those who lack special competence in Islam. Do you advocate for a clerical system in the Sunni school similar to the Shi'i? And if so, might that open the door for Khums to help build an institution like Usuli?
Yeah, well, the Khums, yeah,
Is that like
Sunnis, huh?
Is that the tithe that the Shia do? The
Yeah.
12th or whatever?
Yeah, Sunni,
So I think it's like a tithe.
yeah, but it's what's
Different
fifth of the income.
Oh, fifth. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
fifth. Okay.
Allah decreed that Khums, what is it? It's larger than a fifth. It's 1/5. I'm blanking out as to the translation, but anyway, a certain percentage other than zakat of the income it belongs to the Prophet and God, meaning it belongs to the public treasury, and that amount of money would go to support the poor, the homeless, the wayfarers, go to support public projects and so on. And after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the state started collecting land taxes and guild taxes that they called kharaj. And because the state started collecting the kharaj from what becomes Sunni Islam, most Sunni scholars said that the khums that used to be collected at the time of the Prophet has become null and void, has been abrogated. It ended with the death of the Prophet, and that's because they were paying kharaj, they were paying taxes to the state. And this is separate and apart from zakah, because zakah is actually, when you think about 2.5% on money that you have saved, it's actually a very small amount. It's not substantial at all. In Shia Islam, the khums is, in Ja'fari school and Zaydi school, the khums was considered to continue to be obligatory after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and to be separate and apart from whatever money the state collects, and it is specifically goes to support the religious, the fuqaha and the religious establishments, the clerics, the study of fiqh and sharia, and that doctrine in the Ja'fari and Zaydi school actually saved the study of sharia and aqidah in Shia Islam. In Sunni Islam, that wouldn't fall because the state was in power for most of the time, and there were awqaf, rich people created awqaf that were exempt from taxation by the state, and these awqaf supported all types of educational and public works and taking care of orphans and so on. The problem really hit home when, after colonialism, all the awqaf became a ministry, and Sunni Muslims limited themselves because the state no longer collected kharaj, it collected daraib, just normal taxes. But Sunni Muslims never brought back the idea of the Khums to support religious or educational or, basically for jihad. Not military, necessarily military jihad, but the jihad of ilm, of searching knowledge. It continued on to Shia Islam, but it died in Sunni Islam. And Sunni Muslims felt the impact of that when the Awqaf had become nationalized, it became state property, and the zakat amount was no longer sufficient, was not sufficient to support private endowments. And so that contributed to the plight of Sunni Islam, where basically you either are supported by the state or you have no support. Because the Awqaf are now controlled by the state and the zakat is not enough. In Shia Islam, it continued to, the Khums went to support seminaries and went to support the study of Sharia and so on. So that's what the question is referring to. Yeah, I do. Let's put aside the Shia Sunni thing because we get into the ugly sectarianism. But what I can say is this: there is a pressing need for people who actually specialize in the study of Shari'atullah. Not the clerical class that is controlled by governments, because that they only then become apologists for the governments. And you look at the clerical class, and everywhere that you have a dictatorship, they're simply apologists for power. And they, as we saw recently, was Al-Qadr and so many others. Private money has to be the source that supports the pursuit of especially the divine will. While I don't want the state to apply the divine will, because I don't want a theocracy, but I want the divine will to be something that is searched and taken seriously in the private sphere. And there's no way of doing that without private money. And so I do wish that Sunni Muslims would revisit their fiqh and rediscover that the Khums is required to support the study of Sharia and the pursuit of fiqh itself. And that would be a huge game changer. I mean, then you would have a means of supporting students and scholars and a healthy private sphere in which God is taken seriously, but outside the power of the state. I think it's among Sunni Muslims, when they say, "Well, I pay my zakah and that's all," I think it's a huge failure. I mean, I think what Allah expects from Muslims is much more than the zakah, because the zakah is a minimum amount that doesn't relieve people of the burden of sadaqah. And I do believe in the fiqh of Al-Khums. The fiqh of Al-Khums is very well supported, and it's in the Quran. I mean, the Quran itself, it says that the Khums is obligatory. And so, you're talking about, imagine if people actually took the Khums from their income, not their savings, and that income went to support scholars and students and publications and so on. I think it would contribute to a very rich intellectual life that is completely missing. Does that answer the question? If they're still online, then
They're silent. So
okay.
okay, there's another one. We want to do.
Okay, let's do the what was the other one?
I find the idea of using reason as a filter through which to analyze problems that we are faced with intuitively appealing, as it is consistent with the principle that Allah's will is most likely expressed in the most beautiful and reasonable outcome. This approach seems to help resolve elegantly many interpretive issues, but I struggle to reconcile the story of Abraham's sacrifice in this framework, as it seems to be a situation in which the most beautiful and reasonable outcome was not chosen. I understand some scholars actually question whether Abraham failed this test, but I was wondering if the professor could share his thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, let's explore the story of Abraham, because I don't think I think the story of Abraham and the sacrifice is very different in the Quranic discourse than in the biblical discourse. Very different, and I think that we have done a huge disservice when the Quranic text was interpreted in light of the biblical text. But let's save that to another day, because that's going to be a long discussion and to go through all the material. But I mean, the even if we assume that the biblical narrative about the sacrifice of a son that was then, whether that has a normative role for us as non-prophets is a very different question. To put this differently, I don't think you can cite the story of Abraham as evidence that you must adopt blind obedience to the text. Because Abraham had something that we don't have. Abraham was Khalilullah, was God's close companion, and received revelation from Allah. And so he didn't have to do what we human beings have to do, and that's the interpretive framework. So if we make an error in understanding Allah's will, Allah is not going to come and save us from our errors by giving us a sheep to sacrifice instead, assuming that the biblical narrative is right. Because we don't have the guarantee of divine intervention, that means we have to take the interpretive process according to methodological rules that are very different than the ones that an Ibrahim would have to take. So, and this is actually important, because I was in a New Jersey mosque. I actually got really embarrassed because the imam there, you know him, Imam Shibli. There were people who were interested in Islam, and we were at Princeton, and they coming to visit, and then Imam Shibli, the imam got up and he was giving this khutbah. And said, in Islam we must be willing, Allah, citing that you must love Allah more than your father, your siblings, your sons, and so on and so forth. And then said, in Islam we must even be willing to sacrifice our sons and daughters. And then he cited the story of Ibrahim, and then he said, we must be happy to slaughter our sons and daughters. And of course, it freaked these people out, and they never came to I mean, they actually, after that, the couple completely avoided me. But to use the story of Ibrahim in that way is the methodological error. Ibrahim, as a prophet, could be cast in fire and not burned, and was guaranteed by Allah immunity from error, because even as again, and I'm assuming that I'm just taking the biblical story for granted right now. as it is. But that doesn't transfer to non-profits who have to deal with the consequences of error. And I think it's completely problematic to say we must be willing to slaughter our sons and daughters for Allah. That's not the type of husn that Allah wants for us. It's not the type of beauty that Allah wants for us. We should, because we're not going to be cast in fire and not burn. So it's a completely flipped paradigm. It's an erroneous assumption.
There's just that last question about the sign.
Yeah, should I ask?
Yeah,
Okay.
because they've been waiting several halakas.
Oh, okay.
Oh, poor
Is there,
people.
could this be the last one? Or are you
Yeah.
okay energy-wise?
I'm fizzling out, but let's. Okay, I'll take that question. I'll take one more from you guys, and let's. The method is still there, but it's like
We want to have a gentle crash. Not
I'm worried what's going to happen after the method is gone, and then my body just throws a huge rebellion on me.
Okay. I recently came across a video Ask Any Question with Dr. Khalid at Hub 925, uploaded on October 29th. In this video, as well as other videos, you have repeatedly mentioned that converts should rise to positions of power in the U.S. as they are more representative of the American people than immigrants. I totally support this view because converts tend to understand the culture better and they are able to convey their message in a way that resonates with many people in the U.S. That being said, in my opinion, immigrants like myself listening to your lectures are left uncertain about their role in Western society. You haven't provided any examples or tips for immigrants in the U.S. on how they could follow your footsteps to become influential and potentially serve their communities, whether Muslims or non-Muslims. To conclude this point, I would very much appreciate if you could dedicate a few minutes in any of the future talks to shed the light on this topic if possible. Another aspect of this video I would like to discuss is education. In the same video, you describe success in terms of the educational attainment from top schools. However, as you may know, not all Muslims are given the support or the preparation to attend schools like UCLA, Cornell, etc. Accordingly, do you think that students receiving their education from less-known schools are at a disadvantage in terms of establishing their academic careers, long-term success, and positive influence? This leads me to the next point, utilization of knowledge to serve humanity. Many scholars encourage Muslims to receive knowledge in cutting-edge scientific fields. However, it is not clear how scientists can utilize their knowledge to serve humanity unless they are working in a medical field. For example, my wife and I are doing our PhDs in mathematics and microbiology. Respectively, both fields are divorced from reality of what Muslims need today. In your opinion, how can we bridge the gap between what is needed in our community and the scientific domains we are conducting our research in?
Okay, wow.
It's really like 3 questions.
3 semesters.
Okay, some very important. If I came to the U.S. and I found that converts were in complete power and the immigrant Muslims were marginalized and unrepresented, I would have probably said something in support of immigrant Muslims. In other words, I tend to side with the disempowered. And the reality is that converts are completely disempowered and marginalized. But there's a bigger sociological, is that my study of history has consistently shown that where Islam becomes adopted by natives, where natives embody the Islam that flourishes in their native culture, Islam survives. Where Islam remains an immigrant phenomena, it becomes a very temporary phenomenon. It exists as long as the immigrants exist. Now, having said that, what can immigrants do? Well, any immigrant that wants to become a source of authority in a place like the US, Canada, any place in the West, they have an obligation to strive as hard as they can to do two things: study native culture systematically and thoroughly. I mean, what I did is that I was obsessed with, for a while, as now thinking back, it's, you know, with everything Americana. I wanted to understand. I wanted to, until now. I mean, so that one is the systematic study of language, literature, culture, all manifestations of culture. Second is to be very cognizant of your own limitations as an immigrant. Because, for instance, although I tried to study, for a while I used to go around listening to, what's their name? The Beatles. Beatles music, and, you know, I remember things like listening to the ABBA, which was... I remember things like I used to listen to a British group called Bonnie M. I didn't like it because I like Kulthum, but I would listen to study, to understand. Ultimately, I reached the conclusion that I'm never gonna get it when it comes to music. So, you know, when I see what Mido, our son, listens to, I'm like just puzzled, completely just confounded by how can he get any joy out of this stuff. You know, and how is it that he doesn't want to listen to Kulthum all the time? You know? But there are aspects that, so I'm cognizant of my own limitations, and the role that I play as an immigrant is that within that I am eager to work with natives and converts in an Islamic project. I mean, I don't want immigrants to stay at home. I just don't want them to monopolize the space and be hegemonic in their influence, because that's exactly what's happening. And till now, I'm worried about Islam in a place like the United States because it has not become a native phenomenon. Islam has existed in this country other than among Muslim slaves. But we forget that there were huge Muslim communities in South America, in Central America. There were huge Muslim communities in the late 1800s in the US. There were another massive Muslim community in the 1930s and the 1960s. And consistently, time and again, by the third generation, they're all gone. They are absorbed by the culture because it remained an immigrant phenomenon. So I want, what immigrants can do is work very hard to spread Islam and to get people to come to Islam, to invite. But to do that, you have to have a celebratory sense about your own Muslim message. You can't play that role if you feel defeated, if you are not sure whether Islam offers anything. Because then what are you inviting people to? If you can't answer the question of, well, why can't I just be agnostic? Well, why can't I just have fun? Well, you know, why can't I just work very hard and be a good human being? What can you do as an immigrant is work hard enough to have responses to these questions and create the institutional framework so that we can have the type of conversations that would generate responses to these questions. Because actually you need entire institutions of very smart people talking with each other to answer a question like, what does Islam offer a society that believes it is post-religious? that it has outlived the usefulness of religion. And you need discussions at a very intense theological and philosophical level to start creating the type of discourse that would engage these types of questions in a serious fashion, not in a Mickey Mouse fashion, not in the type of apologetics that we see, So now, one as a Muslim, I want to make this point really clear, that as a Muslim, one of the biggest obscenities of modernities is that Muslims have forgotten that one way that you do ibadah, one way that you worship Allah, is by doing the type of work with the laws of God, the laws of nature, the laws that God created in nature. لِتَعْمِيرِ الْأَرْضِ. So every time a Muslim discovers something in medicine, something in that serves humanity, that is worship, that is ibadah. And that is very serious ibadah. I mean, is it possible for a Muslim to meet their God having done nothing other than create some type of medical cure? That's if you cure human beings, that's a wali. You can elevate yourself to a saintly status. So absolutely, and it should be Muslims at the forefront of serving humanity. If all the Nobel Prize winners in science, if we follow the Islamic message, it should be Muslims that are winning Nobel Prizes in science and discoveries and medicine, and because it should be Muslims who are most keen to serve humanity. So that's one thing, is that if God has given you the intellect to excel in biology or in chemistry, then serve God by excelling in what the talent that God gave you. That's one. Second, biological insights, when it is coupled with theology, produces some remarkable things. Because, I mean, the type of understanding, deep understanding of science that can contribute to a conversation about, as has happened in the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. The Vatican has some of the top scientists in biology and chemistry and physics, and they are attached to the Vatican, and a university like Notre Dame, they contribute to the theological debate about God and the need for God, about the relationship between science and religion, in profound ways. That the mistake we do as Muslims is that we think that the only way to serve Allah is to become a da'iyah, to become a preacher, to give a khutbah. So you get a biologist who has a very good mind in biology, but a horrible mind when it comes to giving a khutbah at Jum'ah. But yet we have people who have excellent scientific minds insist on giving the khutbah at Jum'ah, in other words, doing what they're not equipped to do, because they think that that's the only way to serve Allah, and that's not true. The other thing is that we need committed Muslims who make the type of discoveries that would make them billionaires, and then they would take all these millions that they've made and create Muslim institutions, Muslim educational institutions. The problem we have is that a lot of people, a lot of Muslims, are very pious until they become rich. And then when they become rich, all the promises they've made to Allah and to all the good deeds they're going to do, they forget. And that's, if you're able to become very successful, to make a discovery, a copyrighted discovery or a trademark discovery that makes you a very wealthy human being, and then you can take that wealth and support those miserable students, miserable meaning unlucky, students who dedicate their life to the study of Sharia or philosophy or theology, then you are doing an enormously blessed act of jihad. That is the true jihad of our age. So I mean, there's nothing to get down about. In fact, be the best biologist you can be, and always, whatever you do, always think about how that could be rendered in the service of Islam. And we meaning people who Allah has given a philosophical or a theological or a legal mind to, need financial backers. We need people who have money to support them. Look at how other communities have done. I mean, what's his name? That guy at the very famous natural law professor at Notre Dame. John Finnis, yeah. I mean, look at the philosophical influence of a Catholic philosopher like John Finnis. If we had the John Finnis in Islam, it would be a very different world. But I know John Finnis, or used to know him personally, and John Finnis has always found devout Catholic money that has supported him throughout his career and continues to. I am sure that any John Finnis intellect, Muslim intellect, that is born in Islam dies off because there's no support base. I mean, God could give you the greatest intellect in the world, but if you are not given the platform and the space to grow and to flourish, you die off. Talent dies. Talent requires an entire society to support it and promote it and push it forward. So there is a lot to do, and support the Usuli Institute.
I like that shameless.
Once you're done with your doctorate, then and get good jobs and make big money and.
I'm writing my dissertation.
Oh yeah, I forgot. You are in this field.
Chemical, right?
Medical physics.
Medical.
Yeah, nuclear medical physics. Yeah. Right.
Just become very rich.
I mean.
Inshallah. And I'll actually donate appropriately. I won't just be like, inshallah.
Okay, alhamdulillah. SubhanAllah, I always say, I'm just going to do 1 hour sadaqah, and I'm going to be very disciplined. I'm going to cut out everything out, and it never works.
You've been doing this for decades.
I know. Since you were a baby, I used to hear you say that.